The train whistle pierced the silence of the Montana sunset in 1875. But as the clouds of steam and dust settled around Copper Creek Station, Grace Collins stood alone on the wooden platform, her white wedding dress collecting dirt at the hem. The man she had promised to marry was nowhere to be found, and with each passing minute the knot in her stomach tightened. People whispered and pointed, their voices carrying on the wind as they passed by the abandoned bride. Miss. "The last train's gone for the day," the station master said, tipping his hat awkwardly as he locked the ticket office. "Might want to find lodging for the night." Grace clutched her small valise, fighting back tears. "He said he'd be here," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her fiancé, Thomas Winthrop, had written with explicit instructions for her to travel from Boston to marry him at his newly acquired ranch. 6 months of correspondence, a proposal by mail, and now, nothing. "Madam, I don't mean to intrude, but you've been waiting here 5 hours now." The deep voice came from behind her, startling Grace from her thoughts. She turned to see a tall man leaning against a post, dusty from the trail with a worn Stetson pushed back on his head. His eyes were kind despite the weathered face, and he stood with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. "I'm Isaac Irving," he said, pushing off from the post. "Town marshal, and unless I miss my guess, you're waiting on someone who ain't coming." Grace lifted her chin. "You don't know that? Perhaps there was an accident, or Thomas Winthrop?" Isaac asked, his voice gentle but firm, her breath caught. "You know him?" Isaac's expression darkened. "Everyone around these parts knows Winthrop. And I'm mighty sorry to tell you this, but he's made a habit of this particular game." "Game?" Grace repeated, her voice barely audible. "He writes to women back east, promises them land, wealth, marriage. They come with their savings, and then he disappears. Usually after he's convinced them to hand over whatever money they brought." Grace felt her knees weaken. She had given Thomas $500, her entire inheritance, to invest in their future together. "I don't believe you," she said, though the truth was settling in her heart like a stone. Isaac nodded slowly. "I understand, but night's falling and you need somewhere safe to stay. The boarding house is full up with the cattle buyers in town, but my sister runs a small place just off Main Street. She'll have room for you." "I have no money," Grace admitted, shame burning her cheeks. "He said he would pay for everything once I arrived." Isaac's face softened. "Then it's my duty to help. I'll wait with you tonight, tomorrow, as long as it takes for you to decide what you want to do next." "Why would you do that?" she asked suspiciously. He looked at the horizon, where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red. "Because nobody deserves to be left waiting alone," he said simply. "Especially not in a wedding dress." That night, Isaac's sister Ida welcomed Grace into her modest home with no questions asked. She provided a simple meal and a clean nightgown, giving Grace the privacy to cry silently into her pillow, mourning not just Thomas, but the future she had imagined. The next morning, Grace awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed in the only other outfit. She had packed a simple blue traveling dress and made her way to the kitchen where Ida was cooking. "Isaac asked me to tell you he'll be by at noon," Ida said, sliding a plate of food in front of Grace. "He's making inquiries about your Mr. Winthrop." "He's not my Mr. Winthrop," Grace said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "And I don't need the marshal spending his time on this. I need to find work and a way to return east." Ida sat across from her. "East, back to what?" The question caught Grace off guard. What was waiting for her in Boston? Her parents were dead, her job as a schoolteacher filled by someone else, her room in the boarding house rented to another young woman. She had burned her bridges, certain she was sailing toward a bright future in the West. "I don't know," she admitted. "Well, until you figure it out, Copper Creek could use a teacher. The last one left to get married 3 months ago." Hope flickered in Grace's chest for the first time since arriving. "They would hire me, a stranger. Isaac has influence with the town council. And we're desperate enough that they'd probably hire just about anyone who can read and write." By the time Isaac arrived, Grace had a plan forming. She would teach, save money, and then decide whether to stay or return east. What she hadn't expected was the flutter in her stomach when Isaac walked through the door, his badge catching the sunlight. "Miss Collins," he said, removing his hat. "I've got news, but you might not like it." Grace steeled herself. "Please tell me." Winthrop was seen boarding a train to Denver yesterday morning with a woman. Seems he's married, and this isn't his first scheme. The betrayal shouldn't have hurt. She barely knew Thomas beyond his letters, but it did. "I see. I've sent telegrams to Denver and the towns along the way." "He won't get away with this. The money is gone," Grace said, resignation in her voice, "and I was a fool to give it to him." "You're not the first to be taken in by someone you trusted," Isaac said, "and there's something else. The land he claimed to own your supposed ranch. It belongs to the Forrester family. Has for 20 years, Grace laughed bitterly. "Of course it does. But," Isaac continued, "I spoke with the town council this morning. We need a teacher. The position comes with a small house behind the schoolhouse. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." Grace studied his face. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." Isaac looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "When I first came to Copper Creek, I was running from something too. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most." He met her eyes. "Besides, when I saw you standing there in that white dress, looking so lost but still so determined, I knew you were someone worth helping. And if I decide to leave once I've saved enough money, then I'll wait with you at that station until the train comes," he said with a small smile. "But I have a feeling Copper Creek might grow on you." 2 weeks later, Grace stood in front of 20 children of varying ages in the one-room schoolhouse. Her wedding dress had been carefully packed away, and she wore a sensible brown skirt and white blouse that Ida had helped her sew. The small house behind the school was sparse but clean, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, Grace felt a sense of purpose. Isaac checked on her often, sometimes bringing a book for her small collection or fresh vegetables from his garden. They developed a routine of Sunday dinners at Ida's, and Grace found herself looking forward to his visits, his stories, and the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. As summer turned to fall, Grace became a fixture in Copper Creek. She organized a harvest festival for the schoolchildren, started a women's reading circle, and even convinced the town council to allocate funds for new school books. All the while, Isaac watched her blossom, his admiration growing into something deeper. One crisp October evening, Isaac found Grace at the train station, staring at the tracks that led east. "Planning a trip?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light despite the fear in his heart. Grace shook her head. "Just thinking about how different my life would be if Thomas had been there that day, or if you hadn't." "Do you regret staying?" She turned to him, her face softened by the setting sun. "No, I've found something here I never had in Boston." "The children love you," Isaac said. "The whole town does. And what about you, Marshal Irving?" Grace asked boldly. Isaac took a step closer. "I think you know the answer to that. I'd like to hear it all the same." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I said I'd wait with you forever, and I meant it. But I'd rather spend forever walking beside you than waiting." Grace's heart raced as she realized what he was saying. "Isaac, I'm not Thomas," he said quickly. "I don't have grand promises or fancy words. I've got a small house that needs a woman's touch, a steady job, and a heart that's been yours since I saw you standing here in that white dress." "Are you proposing, Marshal?" "Not yet," he said with a smile, "but I'm declaring my intentions. I want to court you properly, Grace Collins." "If you'll have me." Grace thought of the letters from Thomas, full of flowery words that meant nothing. Then she looked at Isaac, honest, steadfast Isaac, and knew that his simple declaration meant everything. "I would like that very much," she said. Their courtship became the talk of Copper Creek. Isaac would escort Grace to church on Sundays, bring her wildflowers he'd picked along his patrol route, and sometimes just sit on her porch in the evenings, talking until the stars came out. For Christmas, he carved her a beautiful wooden box for her teaching supplies, and she knitted him a scarf that he wore proudly despite the gentle teasing from his deputies. Winter in Montana was harsh, but Grace found warmth in the community and in Isaac's growing affection. She wrote to her former landlady in Boston, asking her to send the few possessions she'd left behind, officially closing that chapter of her life. In February, a blizzard hit Copper Creek, burying the town in snow for days. Isaac insisted on checking on Grace, fighting through the drifts to reach her small house. He found her huddled by the stove, trying to keep warm as the wind howled outside. "You shouldn't have come," she scolded, even as she helped him remove his frozen coat. "It's dangerous out there." "I couldn't stand the thought of you alone in this," he said, his voice rough from the cold. Grace built up the fire and made coffee while Isaac stomped feeling back into his feet. They sat close together, listening to the storm rage outside, talking quietly about nothing and everything. "I never thought I'd find this," Grace said, looking into the fire. "Find what?" "Peace, belonging." She looked at him. "You," Isaac took her hand. Grace, a loud crack interrupted him as a tree branch, heavy with snow, broke off and crashed against the side of the house. Grace jumped and Isaac instinctively pulled her closer. "It's all right," he murmured, his arm around her shoulders. In the quiet that followed, with the fire crackling and their hearts beating in tandem, Isaac turned to face her. "I can't wait any longer," he said. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I love you, Grace Collins. Will you marry me?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Are you certain, after everything?" "More certain than I've ever been about anything." She touched his face, feeling the stubble under her fingertips. "Then yes." "Yes, I will marry you." The blizzard trapped them in the house for 2 days, giving them time to plan their future together. When they finally emerged, they announced their engagement to a town that had been expecting it for months. They were married in April, with wildflowers dotting the prairie and the promise of new beginnings in the air. Grace wore a simple dress of pale blue, not white. That dress was packed away, a reminder of a different path not taken. Ida stood as her witness, and the entire town gathered to celebrate their marshal and their teacher joining lives. As they exchanged vows in the small church, Grace looked into Isaac's steady eyes and knew that this was where she was meant to be all along. Not waiting at a station for a man who would never come, but finding one who would never leave. After the ceremony, Isaac surprised her with a deed to a small piece of land just outside town. "It's not much," he said, "but it's ours, room to build something new." "It's perfect," Grace whispered, her heart full. That evening, as they sat on the porch of what was now their home, Isaac said, "There's something I never told you about that day at the station." "What's that?" Grace asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "I'd seen you arrive on that train. I watched you waiting all day before I finally approached you." She sat up, surprised. "Why did you wait so long?" Isaac looked sheepish. "At first, I was just doing my job, keeping an eye on a stranger in town. Then I couldn't stop watching you, the way you held your head high even as hours passed. The way you thanked the station master even though your heart was breaking." He took her hand. "I knew Winthrop's reputation, knew he wasn't coming, but I waited because I wanted to be the one to help you. Selfish, I suppose." "Not selfish," Grace said softly. "Fate." As spring turned to summer, Grace and Isaac settled into married life. She continued teaching, and he continued keeping the peace in Copper Creek. They worked together on their land in the evenings and weekends, building a larger house for the family they hoped to have. In July, exactly 1 year after Grace had arrived in Montana, they received word that Thomas Winthrop had been arrested in California for fraud and other schemes. The telegram said there was a chance some of his victims might recover a portion of their losses. "Do you want to pursue it?" Isaac asked as they sat at their kitchen table. Grace considered the question. "The money would help with the new house," she said slowly, "but I'm not sure I want anything that connects us to him." "Whatever you decide, I support you." In the end, Grace wrote a letter to the authorities, explaining her situation but declining to press charges. "Let the others who need it more have my share," she told Isaac. "I've already gained so much more than I lost." By autumn, their new house was nearly complete and Grace had news of her own to share. She waited until they were walking along the creek that gave the town its name, the leaves turning gold around them. "Isaac," she said, stopping to face him, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her expectantly, his face now as familiar to her as her own. "We're going to need that extra bedroom sooner than we thought," she said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Isaac's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. We're having a baby." The joy that spread across his face was everything Grace had hoped for. He lifted her gently, spinning her around before setting her carefully back on her feet. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." That night, as they lay together in their bed, Isaac's hand protectively over where their child grew, Grace thought about the twists of fate that had brought her here. One man's betrayal had led her to true love, a home, and now a family. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac murmured, his breath warm against her neck. "That day at the station," she said, "how it felt like the end of everything, but it was really the beginning." He pulled her closer. "I meant what I said that day. I would have waited with you forever." "I know," Grace said, turning to face him in the darkness. "But I'm glad we didn't have to wait." Their son was born the following spring, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit. They named him William, after Isaac's father, and the entire town celebrated his arrival. Grace took a break from teaching, focusing on motherhood while helping Isaac with the administrative side of his work. She found she had a talent for organization and record-keeping, skills that made his job easier and the town run more smoothly. As William grew, so did Copper Creek. The railroad brought more settlers, businesses, and opportunities. Isaac was eventually offered the position of county sheriff, a promotion that recognized his fairness and dedication. "What do you think?" he asked Grace one evening as William, now 3, played at their feet. It would mean more responsibility, more time away from home. Grace considered the question carefully. "I think you'd be wonderful at it, and we would manage just as we always have." "Together," Isaac said with a smile. "Together," she agreed. 5 years to the day after they met, Isaac took Grace back to the train station where it all began. William stayed with Ida, excited for a rare night with his favorite aunt. "Why are we here?" Grace asked as they stood on the same platform where she had once waited in her wedding dress. Isaac took both her hands in his. "5 years ago, you stood here thinking your life was over before it had really begun. I want you to know that every day since then has been a gift to me." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Isaac, let me finish," he said gently. "We've built a good life, you and I. A home, a family, a place in this community. But I never want to forget where we started, how precious this is, how easily it might never have happened." From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. "I couldn't afford this when we got married," he said, opening it to reveal a gold ring set with a small diamond. "But I promised myself that someday I would give you everything you deserve." Grace looked down at her original wedding band, a simple gold circle that had never diminished in meaning. "You've already given me everything," she said. "More than I ever dreamed. Will you accept this anyway, as a promise that the next 5 years and all the years after will be even better than the first?" Grace held out her hand, letting him slide the new ring alongside the old one. "Yes," she whispered. "Always yes." As the evening train pulled into the station, steam billowing around them, Isaac pulled her close for a kiss that held the same promise as their first devotion, partnership, and a love that had only deepened with time. When they parted, Grace smiled up at him. "Should we go home to our son?" "In a minute," Isaac said, his arm around her waist as they watched the train disgorge its passengers. "Let's wait a little longer." And so they stood together as the sun set over Copper Creek, no longer waiting for something to begin, but savoring what they had built together, a love story that had started with an empty platform and a simple promise. Years later, when William was grown with children of his own, he would often ask to hear the story of how his parents met. Grace would look at Isaac, his hair now gray at the temples but his eyes still bright with love for her, and they would tell of the bride left waiting at the station and the marshal who promised to wait with her forever. A promise kept through decades of joys and sorrows, through the births of their 3 children, through the growth of Copper Creek from a dusty outpost to a thriving town. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the house was empty save for the 2 of them, Isaac and Grace would walk down to the train station. They would stand on the platform where it all began, hands clasped together, and remember how the end of one dream had led to something far greater than either could have imagined. "I'm still waiting with you," Isaac would say, his voice rough with age but still carrying the same steadfast devotion. And Grace, her heart as full at 70 as it had been at 25, would reply, "And I with you, forever."